Kia ora, everyone. You can hear the train in the background. Oh. I went rock climbing with some friends yesterday, and now I am very sore. But it is a beautiful evening. I think this, in fact, is going to be our only beautiful day in quite a long time. I think the next week is looking slightly grim. But I get to sit on my balcony today, judge some cool club night after this, and enjoy rooibos, the official drink of Auckland Epsilon, which all the debaters drink when they come to practices at my place. As we've got a few minutes, I thought I'd share some of my other interests with you. I really like succulents. So I brought my succulents from upstairs to show you. These are my baby succulents. So they were slightly ill at someone else's house. And so they were brought to me to put in my windowsill where it gets very, very bright sunlight. And they've since sprouted. And then, so they're the big green ones. And I've since taken some of the clippings from my very large succulent, and they now populate the bottom of it, and they're growing some little shoots as well, which I think is very sweet. Big fan of succulents. Very weak though, they're babies. You have to water succulents frequently when they're very young. And then obviously you just decrease the frequency of watering as they grow up. Gardening tips with Daniel. We'll just wait another minute for people who want to join and listen to an excellent presentation on second speakers. Come along. I have another jersey in case it gets unbearably cold out here, but it's actually looking pretty fine. Since lockdown's become there's a lot more ambient noise. The trains have become more frequent, and obviously people are driving around quite a bit more. So if you are having trouble hearing, flick through a comment, and I will speak louder. Okay, it's just gone 5 o'clock. So today we're chatting about second speakers. Second speakers are kind of like the middle child of the debating landscape. I think they are often forgotten, often left out, often not talked about, especially considering how much time and effort we put into teaching people how to be good first and third speakers. We don't have a lot of chat about how to be an exceptional second speaker. And I think this is a huge pity because I think speaking second is the position that is most about art. It is you have to be quite dynamic. You have a huge role in shaping the debate and changing the way that the adjudicators see the debate. And unfortunately, often it is undercompensated. So if you are an adjudicator who just finds yourself habitually being like, I just don't think the second contributed to any of the debate. Obviously, you could just be seeing a lot of bad seconds. But think about some of the more subtle stuff they're doing and how that ends up playing into your decision. In terms of both the responses they give and in the extension and shaping that they're able to provide to the debate. They're not just glorified polishers of first speakers, though I would say that the mark of an excellent second speaker is the way they make their first speakers look particularly good and the way they prepare their third speakers to exploit the end part of that debate. So in some ways, it's a slightly thankless role. But one that if you do exceptionally well, you will get lots of thanks because your teammates will recognize the enormous contribution you make to their debating careers. So the role of a second speaker is often discussed and thrown around, and lots of people have very strong views on it. Second speakers need to do this, second speakers need to do that. The way I like to think about the role of second speakers is in doing three things. The first, obviously, is to extend. And you extend the debate in the way that many, especially older generations of debaters, like second split points, just entirely self-contained points that add a new harm or a new value to the debate, extending the scope of the debate, keeping the opposition on their toes. Of course, this can be done in many other ways. I often like to bring the thinking behind BP debating into this, in that BP extensions, there's a very strong focus on not penalizing team for if they don't have like an outward extension, or what you think of as like a classic split point or classic extension, which opens the new debate up. No, what the role of the second is to push the debate forwards. And that can be by adding a whole bunch of incredibly important rebuttal, and adding important characterization, adding important framing, adding important, of course, important new mechanisms within existing frameworks of the debate. So there's lots of ways in which you can extend the debate, but just be very careful, and this is often a trap that second speakers fall into, of just repeating your first speaker's points in a slightly nicer way. That is not extending the debate. And if you are only doing straight rebuttal rather than doing comparative analysis, rather than really trying to shape up the fundamentals of the debate, you are probably also failing your role to make sure that the debate is moving forwards. And not only is this bad because I think judges will discriminate against you, they think they won't add it enough to the debate, but also just doesn't help you as a team. It's a huge missed opportunity. In second, you have a lot of latitude to get away with things that a third speaker doesn't, though then again, if you go to somewhere like Australia, third speakers have huge amounts of latitude. So I personally think that the idea of a second and third speaker breaks down a little bit when you go to debating in areas that give a lot more latitude to third speakers to introduce new ideas and essentially whip new cases out of material. But use that opportunity to extend the debate. The second thing is shaping. And though I mentioned framing in the previous point, I want to note that this isn't just about coming out with a new piece of framing from the beginning and saying you should see the debate from this lens. It's all of the subtle things that you do throughout your case, both to gloss the areas that are weaker from your first speaker, as well as drive the debater in the way you present material towards weighing things particular way, towards seeing things in particular clashes, towards assigning importance to stuff. And that all flows from how you prioritize your speech, how you use the foundation section of your speech, or how you explicitly engage with some of the foundational questions of the debate around the comparative, around the framework. So you need to be shaping the debate. And note, good second speakers can often save like a poor case coming out of a first speaker by really redeveloping that material and prioritizing the strongest bits of it and making it seem to the judge like the case that came out of first was a strong, cohesive case, even if they had been skeptical when the first speaker is doing it. And the final thing that I'd say, and this is potentially a little bit more for your second affirming speakers than your second negating speakers, there is a gatekeeping role to second. Often teams will throw out a huge range of different ideas within debates, and at the beginning of the debates, these ideas are like seeds. They could grow into something that is quite meaningful, quite important, but they could just lie dormant. And I think your role as a second speaker in many ways is to try and find the threads that could really be weaponized by later speakers that haven't yet been developed, the kind of, especially at first, because often there'll be a lot of throwaway ideas in the first speaker's speech, and the second speaker will be analyzing your speech to see which things haven't received responses so that they can whip up the material, make it more important in the debate. So your role is also to try and spot those areas of potential analysis and try and fill them. Try to push stuff that you don't think is particularly compelling out of the debate. To do your basics well, make sure that they're not going to win on any like squirreliness from their second and third speakers trying to reshift the debate. So you need to be doing a little bit of a gatekeeping role. So what I thought we could do in terms of this overall presentation, now that we've had a general chat about the role of second speakers, what they add to the debate, I thought we could first talk about how second speakers should structure their points. And this gets into, once again, a lot of the ideas that I was just talking about the role of second speakers and how to take these very abstract, broad ideas about what it means to have a particular role and turn it into something that's quite practically useful for your second speeches. The second thing I thought we'd do is talk about style and look at the ways in which the style of a second speaker is quite interesting, because when we did the first, talking about first speakers, I had quite strong thoughts on how first speakers should try and approach the debate stylistically to try and weight certain parts of the role of first speaker. I don't think this applies as much to a second speaker, but note, I think second speakers often play a really important stylistic role in terms of creating contrast, in terms of changing the way that the other speakers operate within the debate. So there's some useful stylistic tips there for you to be watching out if you are a second speaker. And then the third thing I thought that we would talk about is looking at team strategy. Because I think what is under discussed within debating, we're very much focused on when you get up and you give your speech. That's not what makes an effective debater. And often debaters who do not provide the most brilliant speeches often do quite well in teams because of the way that they are an effective teammate, the way they coordinate other speakers, the way that they make sure that the team is all on the same page. So I want to talk a little bit about the role that second speakers should have within that broader team strategy, and how as a second speaker, if you're feeling like you need more of a role within a debate, how you can impact your role a little more in the behind the scenes stuff in terms of both on the bench and during prep times. As always, note you can throw in you can throw in any comments that you want. We've already got one question which ties in super brilliantly in terms of the thing that I just want to talk about now in terms of structure. But if you have any more questions, just throw in a message. So let's chat about structure. As to that first question from Jeremiah, how do you structure a second speech so that it's not a mess? And before I get into the broad, all of the tips that I have for how you can structure a case, I want to note that there's something quite important about that question. So it's not a mess. A lot of the time, second speakers get overwhelmed, they let ideas blur into each other. And so one of the first things that you need to do to ensure that your speech is not a mess is not just knowing the structural tips they'll give you, but also be quite disciplined. When I was speaking second at Australs, I had to work really hard on not letting myself just like go off on an 8-minute rant, because it's really fun at second because you can kind of just be a wrecking ball, but you have to be quite disciplined. You have to make sure that you have your role in mind. And then when you have that, like, okay, I need to make sure that this is not a mess, I need to be presenting things clearly, then some of the stuff we're going to be talking about now can come into it. So remember, as second speakers, you need to raise that messiness in your consciousness a little bit more, because that's one of the huge flaws that second speakers make in terms of not having impact in the debate. They just speak too massively, they don't structure things appropriately, they don't explain why things are important, and then they just fall out of the debate and the judges ignore them for the later speakers. Okay, so before I jump into just the points that I think second speakers should bring, and remember, if you want like a much briefer version of this, we did a whole episode really early on, I think it may have been the first ones we did, about different speakers in 3v3, where I went through this very, very quickly. We're going to be doing it in a lot more detail here. I'm going to talk about AF second and neg second, because I think there are slightly different things according to your role as a second speaker that you need to be looking out for, and that do have some impact on the way that you structure your speeches. So the affirming second speaker, you need to keep your gatekeeping role slightly more in mind, because note, you are the first response speaker. So obviously your first speaker has had no one to respond to, so they didn't really know the case that was going to come out at the first negating speech, but you do know the case. So often you will be scrambling a little bit, because most good teams are not entirely predictable. They're going to bring really cool points that you haven't thought about, or they might bring really rogue points that you don't think particularly make sense. There'll be a huge temptation just to ignore them. But especially if you go overseas, later teams, like high quality Australian teams, are very good at taking stuff that doesn't sound quite right at first, and you have a huge temptation to ignore, and turning it into debate winning material as it goes on. So as an second affirming speaker, need to be gatekeeping, need to be asking yourself, okay, what is the best version of this point? How do I make sure that I respond just to each idea, like main idea that they've brought in? And often the way this is reflected in structure is that you'll have a small rebuttal section for standalone material. Because note, you're going to be, once again, you know your first speaker's material, so you're going to have a rough idea of what you think the clashes are going to be in the debate, and then the material that comes out of the first snag will most of the time fit fairly neatly into that structure that you've got from your first speaker, but sometimes there'll be things that fall out, ideas you don't think about. So having a small rebuttal section that you can just smack the point really quickly and efficiently, provide the baseline for your third speaker if they want to pull out those responses a little bit more, if their second speaker makes a big deal of it. It's just, and also remember, scaring off the second speaker who may be tempted to make a big deal of it, but if you give those first line responses, may draw the debate more into the domain in which you want to spend most of your time. Useful to have that small rebuttal section for standalone material. If you're a negating speaker, I would caution against having necessarily a standalone rebuttal section because unless, one thing I'll say is unless, for example, that there is a second split or some new substantive material that comes out at the second affirming speaker that you think deserves a response and doesn't fit in the rest, maybe it's good to deal with it. First thing I'm going to do, though, is deal with the substantive contribution of the second speaker, this response, this response, this response. But if it is a really good contribution, it's normally going to be linked into the framework of the debate. So you are going to be introducing it into your broader issues or clashes within the debate. And the reason why I say it's potentially not good to have a standalone rebuttal section is when you're speaking second neg, you should be quite aware of the case that has unfolded from the opposition and know that the third speaker most of the time won't be able to depart enormously from those ideas that have come forward. So if something has received persistent attention, so say it's something your first speaker dealt with really, really quickly, but then the second half wanted to make a big deal out of it, kept wanting to push it, devoted a lot of their speech to it, this isn't something that you should necessarily be dealing with in a standalone way, in a super efficient way. It's not gatekeeping anymore. The fact that they've devoted so much attention to it means that you probably need to be beating it. And in fact, pointing out to the adjudicator that they've devoted a huge amount of time to something that you are able to absolutely demolish is quite an effective thing, but it is part of the debate at that stage. It's not about pushing out of the debate. It'll likely be part of the framework, so you do need to deal with it in a slightly more substantive sense. Okay, so broader structure, getting to the heart of Jeremiah's questions. I like to split up my structure as a second speaker into two areas. And I find this is very important because if you don't do this, this is where the messiness really creeps in. And the reason why I state this is because often at second, there'll be a little bit of unclarity at the first speakers and at the second affirming if you're speaking second neg. So your role is to try and impose clarity within the debate, avoid repetition, try and be efficient. And the way that I find is quite useful to do this is to have the first section be about the foundations of the debate. So that's all the stuff that can become unclear in the debate, like a classic messy debate. And you deal with that first, you get it out of the way, rather than trying to deal with it throughout the rest of your points. Because if you're trying to weave that type of response through the rest of your points, it makes it more likely you'll contradict yourself, you'll misunderstand how to apply it, the judge will leave with a muddied opinion. So you need to deal with some of these foundational questions first. I tend to call this my foundations point, and after I've given my split, I'm going to talk about these three important clashes within the debate. I'll say, but before that, two things to note about the foundation of this debate, or two things that I think deserve attention so that we can have a more clear debate. Many ways that you can introduce this material. And within the foundations points, I'm on the lookout for three particular things. One is the framework. It is just really good most of the time to reintroduce what you think is important within the debate if you don't have neat clashing between the way that the two cases want to be. So say, for example, you're having a debate about like an actor, for example, and there's a clash about what the actor really cares about, but that clash plays out in lots of different ways in all the different points. And you think there's something quite fundamental you can clarify. Often I'll clarify that first. Adjudicator, this is a debate not about whether you should have an autonomous healthcare system for Indigenous people or an integrated healthcare system. It's about the role of activists and what activists should be particularly doing and caring about. We think activists care about this, and their role is able to do these things. So if you establish that framework really clearly, that's really useful. And of course, the other thing that I always go on about is the comparative, which comes to the second bit I was saying. What can activists do? You're going to be comparing things quite specifically, so you need to establish what you think that comparative will be in the debate. So if you clarify your framework and clarify your comparative as early as possible, that just sets you up for a really clean rest of the debate. The third thing that I think is quite useful to introduce in a foundations analysis is sometimes at second you'll just have a brainwave about something that's important for the debate, doesn't fit within, say, the framework or the comparative, but you think just affects a huge number of their points. And the classic example I like to do this is say there's like a huge actor within a particular context that just hasn't received any attention. So say this was a debate about the Afghani the Afghani peace process that's going on. Say it's a debate about Southeast Asia, and in the Afghani debate, they just have not mentioned the United States at all or how it's reacted. And in the Southeast Asia debate, they just haven't mentioned China at all or how China acts. It can be very very useful as a part of your foundation point to just be like, this debate is ridiculous if it does not like grapple with the response of this particular group or this particular thing that's incredibly important. And that can be a very useful tool for just signaling to the judge that a lot of your next responses, a lot of the lines responses are colored through the lens of that really important fundamental bit of characterization or analysis or context that shifts everything. So sometimes good to put that up into your foundation section. Once you've established those broader foundations of the debate, this next thing that I like to do is to look at your issues and your clashes, and this will normally reflect the framework that you've adopted. So you will, within your introduction or within a framework point that comes as a part of your foundation, you will speak about particular issues or clashes as being important, and normally this should flow off very specifically from that. The way I internally set up my issues and clashes, because I know this is another area where things can become so messy, especially at second day, because you've had different speakers that add layers to the debate or layers to the responses. And you're just kind of trying to grapple with all these things. You can't really do a third speaker and just cut to the heart of it, because you need to make sure you're grappling with each independent contribution to make sure that their third speaker doesn't weaponize it in a huge way. I like to split up the way that I deal with this point into three things. So the first is I'll say, at first, we told you this. Just a very brief rephrasing of what the point that you brought at affirming was. And then if there's anything that the opposition hasn't responded to, like a clear chain of context, mechanism, impact that just has received no response, you can point to that out and just really hammer that and just be like, what I'll note at the outset of this clash is we have one mechanism that is entirely unresponded to by the opposition. Even if they're able to prove all of their other mechanisms, they can't win the debate because of this important thing. So it allows you to check whether there's something that hasn't been responded to. The second thing that I do is I explain all of the opposition's responses to that. So I'll be like, at first we told you this, the opposition had three responses. Firstly this, firstly this, firstly this. As to that first response, and then you'll explain it, and remember, you try and portray it in the best light. You want to address the best version of the point that is brought, because you've got a third speaker who then can help clean stuff up if you do too good a job of explaining their point. And then you just go through all of your responses. And once again, I think had a very good episode on responses. And in that, we just went through every single way in which a point can be wrong, from the logic of the point to the application of that logic, to the overall context of it, to the way in which it doesn't engage with the comparative or doesn't engage with the framework. There are so many ways in which a point can be flawed. And I'll just go through those different ways and just whack that point in quite a structured way. And then I'll go into the next response and I'll extract that in a structured way. And normally if you're contrasting over a particular claim, so what is going to happen to this particular group, we think it's going to be good, we think it's going to be bad, you'll be clashing very directly between the 2 points there. So you'll say yours, you'll say their competing world, and then you'll explain all the ways in which your competing world are likely to be correct. So that broadly, yeah, and then at the end of it, of course, you maintain your impact. You explain why the original point is standing, and why you think you are able to win on that particular clash. This is where I think the third element of messiness comes into the second speeches, because often we are told to extend the debate. There's a lot of pressure on speakers to make sure that they're adding to the debate in a way that seems more than just what a third speaker would do, more than just like propping up your points and knocking down the sandcastle of the opposition. I think you just need, as a second speaker, to do this as explicitly as possible. Claim material that is new to the debate, phrase things in ways that are slightly new but still fit within the framework of the debate. Do it in a way that makes it very clear that you are adding, because when a judge has biases or a particular very dogmatic approach about what they want from a second speaker, you need them to be able to tick off in their mind where you are adding things within the debate. So there are two, just as in BP, I think there are two ways to do extension material. One is an inward extension. This is primarily what I focus on, especially in 3v3 styles like Australs. My approach is generally to run quite narrow cases, well-defended cases, and then explain how that allows us to win. But then you can have an outward extension. So outward extensions are particularly useful when you fucked up at first, and you need to suddenly massively U-turn the case that you're bringing, so you can build a lot of new substantive material there. Also, if you just think of an excellent point while your first speaker is speaking and that you can bring to the debate, or you just have so much good material that you think, here is just legitimately a point that could be debate winning for us, but my first speeches first was just so full of also debate winning points, we wanted to move it to second. So let's talk about inward extensions and where they're placed. the way in which I do inward extensions, it's not an extension point. So I'll never be like, when I'm doing an inward extension, I'm going to split on this material. Normally when I'm going through my framework, if I've got a really good inward extension that adds like a very strong new mechanism to achieve the outcome that we stated is our goal, like how is this actor going to be, I'll flag that in my like split I'm doing at the beginning of my speech. I'll be like, I'm going to talk about two things. First thing I'm going to talk about this. Secondly, I'm going to talk about this. And within this point, I'm going to bring you some excellent new material on XYZ inward extension. And inward extensions can be many, many things. So you can be adding mechanisms, you can be adding context, you can be adding a particular bit of framing. Often it's important pieces of characterization. And I think this is particularly useful for a second. Like the job of characterization doesn't stop at a first speaker, though if a first speaker has done it really well, you should be bouncing off that characterization rather than necessarily needing to put more into it. But often it can be really useful to add some like nuanced characterization to a case and to help the adjudicator understand that. Where that fits into your points then is if an inward extension relates to a particular point of clash. So for example, if your first point of clash is how one actor is going to act, and you've got two mechanisms that came from your first speaker and you're going to add a third mechanism, you add it at the point where it is best responsive to the material that the opposition has clashed with. So remember, you have that structure of this is what we told you, this is how they responded. I like to add that third bit where I think it best clashes with the response that's come from the opposition to try and flip it. So if you have a mechanism that does directly clash, highlight it when you get to it. So here's their first response. We deal with it in X way. It's uncomparative. It's not that important. The logic is faulty. It fails to take into account this particular bit of context. But moreover, this directly clashes with the new material that I'm going to bring on how the mechanism operates in the opposite direction. And then you go and you start explaining in a substantive way using the same context, mechanism, impact, structure that I often use like a CMI structure for making sure that I'm doing every steps of a point, but doing it in a quite efficient way and building that up. And then just slotting in all of your bits of extension towards the responses. And if they don't have a response that particularly links up with it, just do it at the end. Now that we've comprehensively beaten all of their points of response, I want to add a further mechanism, this mechanism, which we think even further strengthens our claim. And note adjudicator, while this has a strong cumulative effect, even if one of them weren't to work, we still think we get the overall effect that we need to win the debate. So what I just did there is add that extra bit of point and then very clearly explain how it fits into the debate, either both cumulatively in increasing the impact, adding an extra mechanism, but also saying this is enough to win the debate ourselves. Building up is important, always explaining why your addition is quite important. And note, lean on the work done by the earlier speaker. If they've added bits of characterization that become the basis for the useful mechanism that you're going to bring, tag back to it. Because what you want to do is not just boost your own speech, but make the adjudicator think your first speaker's speech was compelling, was like a very good speech, and that'll help their speech, which will overall help your team. So when you're giving those inward extensions, make sure you're staking out what is your material, but also make sure that you're explaining the good work done by your earlier speakers. The outward extension is slightly different, and note the most important thing for an outward extension is to answer the question, why is this important, and why should this ever have a bearing on how the adjudicator makes their decision? Because note, your first speaker will have set up a framework of the debate, so they've explained their win conditions, what's necessary to win. You need to think about how your split interacts, either in extending those win conditions or in bolstering one of those win conditions for your split to have any importance. And the reality is, there's potentially a danger in encouraging younger speakers so dogmatically to have a second split when you don't have when you don't back it up by telling them that they need to be thinking about these questions of importance. Because one of the reasons why I think second speaking as an art form is slightly underappreciated is that many second speakers waste a lot of their time. They pull out a point that adjudicators are like, wow, this is a really pretty point. It was really well made, but overall I didn't think it had enough of an impact to sway my decision within this debate. That is feedback that second speakers get all the time because they're told that the reason why they bring this point is to fit a dogmatic approach to a role. You just need to have a second split, rather than explain to them, hey, your extension material is something that is really valuable to your team, but in order for it to be valuable, you need to explain and justify it and walk through that material in a way that has meaning to the adjudicator. So make sure that if you are a second speaker bringing any outward extension, and in fact also doing inward extension, you justify it through the weighing and the impacting that we talked about when we in a couple episodes previous. Neat, some more questions. What's your take on delivering substantive first before clash and rebuttal issues? That is a good question. Obviously, I don't think it particularly applies for the inward style of extension that I'm talking about, because it's necessarily like quite integrated. So it can't come one before the other because its value is in bolstering up those particular claims. Where I think outward, and so normally when I'm adding just an extra like point that stands on its own, like completely on its own, I'll tend to put that last, because at the end of the day, if you run out of time and you time poorly within your speech, you need to be thinking about what is best to cut. And if you leave a lot of your first speaker's material adrift in order to get enough time to give a neat second split, unless that second split is really important, or that substantive material is really important, it's generally not worth the cost of not supporting that material. However, note, I've drawn quite a dichotomy between inward extensions and outward extensions. And as many BP speakers in the closing half teams will know, there is a very fine line between derivative material and non-derivative material. And that line is often flirted with by extension material. So to some degree, it'll be inward, to some degree, it'll be outward. It'll be confusing as to which of those two things done. When you have a point that you basically consider extension material, like this is a really new lens for thinking about a debate, a really new lens for dealing with it, that'll often be the thing I was talking about that you put into your foundations material. And you can just make that point there. Just be like, one thing that's usually been missed in this debate so far is the role of China. The role of China influences everything else within this debate. So what I'm going to do at this first note is just give you the material that is necessary to understand the role of China and how China works. That is essentially extension material. And the reason why we put it first is because it has effects on the other stuff. We want to be efficient in the way that we're delivering material, and that means putting points in an order that they cascade. That's like a domino effect. So you're saving your time in later speeches and later points because you've made the point effectively well at the beginning. So yes, if you do have a bit of extension material, be it framing, be it a really good, strong new point that affects your later points, by all means put it earlier, flag it as something that is extension material that is very valuable to your speech. If it is something that builds into the rest of your cases, I would still follow the structure of keeping it quite specific in the way that I would probably keep to the approach that I've outlined, because I think it makes sure that you cover everything, you bolster your first speaker, you respond to their speaker, and you bring in your new material. And I like to keep it in that order to make sure that I'm doing all three of those things. But I would still counsel, unless it's just brilliant debate winning material and you're worried you won't get it out if you put it last, things go wrong in speeches, you end up thinking you can do something in less time than you otherwise would. So you need to be having that question in your mind is this material good enough that I cannot spend time on the issues or clashes that have traditionally been at the heart of this debate? And if you can make that trade-off, then by all means put it first, but most of the times you won't be able to. So that's why I'd advocate putting it last. If you want a speaker who's incredibly good at doing that thing I was talking about, of taking some new lens of looking at the debate or some new point and making it incredibly impactful in the debate, go look up Ray Spellworthy's speeches. As a second speaker, just exceptional at taking a particular theme or particular idea and then coloring both the rest of her speech and by extension the rest of the debate. And she adopts that style. But to do that, you have to be really disciplined and you have to be really focused on explaining and justifying the importance of that point, and also making sure that you're disciplined enough to still get through the rest of the ideas that are key to the debate. Because note, judges tend to have biases towards the material that's already within the debate. So you have to be thinking about how you can overcome those biases. But thank you. Excellent question. Cool. So that's our broad chat on structure and what teams should be doing in terms of figuring out how to structure your second speech, how to make sure that you don't allow that messiness to creep in. And as you'll note, I actually have quite like a surprisingly formalized system for dealing with the messiness of the debate. And I encourage you to play with it and develop your own particular approach to dealing with that stuff. Second thing that we'll chat about in the session is style. And style is great. We've had Noise from the Bench episodes on style. We've had episodes of this podcast that this live stream that looks at particular parts of style and how they approach different things. We spent a lot of time last week talking about first speakers and how style is an incredibly important part of what you're doing as a as a first speaker. And unfortunately, I cannot give you similarly exact answers on how style can benefit a second speaker, because there are a huge range of second speaker styles that are just like dizzyingly effective depending on who's giving that speech. So I wouldn't worry too much about trying to fit any particular mold. Just do what feels comfortable for you. One thing, though, that I think can be incredibly effective as a second speaker is looking to exploit contrast. And the way in which you exploit contrast is to look at the overall tone of the debate that has come before you and look at what you think your third speaker and lead's reply will likely do, and then try and adjust your speaking style to be the thing that the judge needs in that particular moment. So I have spoken with some incredibly fiery first speakers and third speakers, and also some quite like reasonable ones that unflatteringly like could come across to a judge that has particular liking for the dramatic as being a bit boring or not being able to capture their attention. So what I like to do as a second speaker is try and match my speaking style to those particular things. And the way the big binary that I like to play with in my style as a second speaker is the binary between being very reasonable and being very passionate. These are both good things to have within a debate, but to some degree, they can be a little bit mutually exclusive, because the team that seeks to, well, the speaker that seeks to be as reasonable as possible often adopts a more moderate tone. They want to convince the judge to trust them, whereas the passionate speaker wants to shock the judge into accepting particular harms or impact on the debate, on just like blasting the logic out of the water of the opposition. And it's hard to put both of those things into a speech, though of course, it is possible, but needs to slightly be separated within your speech. So what I'll do is if I've had like an incredibly fiery first speaker who's followed by an incredibly fiery opposition, it's just been a lot of shouting across the bench. You come in as a second speaker, you do your foundations material in a really clear, reasonable way for the adjudicator. You just let the adjudicator take a deep breath out. Everything makes so much more sense to them now. You've just picking examples that are particularly moderate and reasonable. You're doing your even ifs. You're explaining the best version of the argument brought from the opposition by this. This is why we still win it. That can win you a lot of brownie points from the judge. And once again, that dip then allows your third speaker to take off a little bit as well. So once again, diving into those points and being able to explain why they're particularly important. If your first speaker, however, is a very reasonable, gentle, for example, Asher Emanuel, like a very nice, clear speaker, often what is useful is being a little bit more no-nonsense, being a little bit more aggressive within your speaking style, and really smacking down the opposition, especially if they've looked like that they have equally being disrespectful to your first speaker, or have not engaged with the ideas of the first speaker, or tried to shift the debate. You can be the one that adds a little bit more fire and spark to your speech in terms of trying to push it in one particular direction. So using that idea of contrast, I think, is incredibly effective as a second speaker. Often I find myself nodding along or just thinking, really, this is what the debate needs. And often that'll come at the second speaker. And note, of course, you shouldn't just be thinking backwards to what your first speaker's done. Always also be thinking a little bit more to your third speaker. Some third speakers either give like a very reasonable speech or a very nice speech, and so that gives you more latitude to be a bit more aggressive, a bit more bombastic, and they can come up and reassure the adjudicator, very good cop, bad cop. But if you are just building up and you know that your third speaker is going to give a very bombastic speech that just is their style, it's the only way they can speak, I'd encourage you to think about whether or not you can take a couple of steps back in your style to give them a little bit more room to come in and be that I am the voice of reason. I'm the person who cares about the things that are most important in this debate. Here's how we win the debate. And this is once again where potentially the thanklessness of being a second speaker might come in for some people, because what this approach is about making other speakers look good. To some degree, it does help you look good, but you are really serving the team here. You're making sure that you provide points of contrast for the other speakers so that their speeches feel more effective, don't feel like it's just an unending stream of shouting or an unending stream of being very reasonable and not really wanting to have like a fun, interesting debate. So you're providing that point of contrast. Very, very helpful for your team overall. Cool. Any other questions on style and structure? Just have a look. If not, we can dive onto team strategy. And remember, I'll stop and answer your questions if you have questions at any point. It's gotten very dark. I wonder if I can chat at Grace. Grace, can you turn the lights on? It's getting very dark. Thank you. There, I should be more bathed than light. I think it's become very cold. That is okay. Okay, team strategy. Second speakers, just commit to the idea that you are in the muck of debating. You are going to be doing the hard work, the unrewarded work for your team. So let's have a talk about how you can help in the background to make sure that your team is working as effectively as possible, not just in terms of the speeches that they're given, but also in terms of having a bit of an eagle-eye view of debate. And the reason why I think it's quite important for a second speaker to do this is I think if you're a second speaker, to some degree, you're really the point person for your speech. You are making a pinch hit decision about what shape the debate should be in, which things you should prioritize. You are really the fulcrum on which the debate turns. And so you should use that like point within the debate to help guide the other speakers within the debate to making decisions that'll be overall best for your team. So I think that there are two useful things to make sure that you're doing this. One, of course, is all the stuff that you're doing. When you're giving your speech, you're making your first speaker look good, you're giving your third speaker a thing to trampoline off, but you also need to be doing that on the bench. And what I think is particularly useful to do with this is when your first speaker is talking and you're listening to them, or when their speakers are doing and you're about to go up, signal to your third speaker what the unique things that you are going to be doing in your speech is, where those jumping off points are, so that they can then think about weaponizing them and using them to the last degree, and that they can potentially start suggesting those things to you. When you are a second speaker, I am constantly asking my first and third speakers to do stuff for me, because first speaker's just spoken, they don't have anything to do. Third speaker's a couple speeches away, they don't have anything to do. I will turn to my first speaker and be like, okay, first speaker, I need you to listen to the second affirming speech or the first negating speech, and tell me each thing that you think they respond to that's effective, and tell me things that you think are missed within their speech. So if I do that, I have an extra pair of ears that has just given a speech and is now able to feed me direct responses where, oh, I think they've misunderstood me, and I've listened, I was like, no, I don't think you explained that well. But it makes sure that you can then go and fill in those gaps, so you can use that speaker as a sounding board, use them as your listening tool, really get them on board. And then with your third speaker, you should be planning out some of those slightly longer term strategies. So every time I have a brainwave about particular extension material that I'm going to bring, either it's like a really good response, or like I think that response can turn into a mechanistic flipping of the argument that I'll bring, I'll signal that to my third speaker and just be like, hello, third speaker. I've had this particular thought. I think it fits into this thing. Start thinking about it. And so they'll be able to start thinking away those responses. And if I've done it early enough, I can turn to them and be like, okay, what's the end consequence? What do you think is the useful extent of this point? And they'll think, I think it gets to here if you do this way, this, and this. And then you can just slot that into your speech, and then they'll be like, oh, lost a bit of my analysis, but usefully, they'll be able to develop that material. But it's about taking all of the different speakers in the debate, using them to their fullest extent, making sure no one's just sitting around not doing anything, because that's the way that teams do particularly well. Teams do well when they're leveraging each person to the max on the particular bench. And I would encourage the second speaker in particular, because you are at that fulcrum point in the debate where things start getting messy, you have to clean up particular things, you have to drive a particular direction. That is a good moment to get your other speakers on board, really cement that team line, make sure you're doing things like as a cohesive whole. Hopefully, if you're a leader's reply as well as a second speaker, then you can then like alley-oop yourself as LeBron might, and like really benefit from that work you've done with your third speaker. But if your first speaker is the one who's giving the reply, you have planted a couple seeds in your third speaker's mind. You can tell the first speaker how you can once then be that point person for your first speaker when they're trying to put together the debate or putting together your leader's reply. So you can once again be a brain in the room. You've got 3 or 4 speeches after you just to listen to and think about the best way to phrase your particular case for your leader's reply. So offer that material to your first speaker, make sure that they're there, collaborate with them. So yeah, that's how I think that second speakers can broadly be very, very helpful on the behind the scenes stuff. And you need to take you need to take an active role. You need to take a leadership role within your team, and I think it's particularly useful if second speakers do that. In terms of prep, I don't think there's anything particularly that second speakers should do with prep. Often, like when I speak second, often I'll be like, okay, I think we've got too many overall impacts to fit within a first speaker speech. So first speaker, focus a little bit more on characterization, building out that stuff, include this particular line, because then if I'm a second speaker, I'll be able to take the huge weight of characterization that's been put by the first and really like whip it into nice mechanisms. So it's a way of spreading efficiency. But that's some like higher level, and I often find that only works when you're quite in tune with your first speaker. I'd like have a very good debating relationship with them, which is equally what a third speaker should be doing with the second. Hey, you should bring up this point. You should do this. You should like bring in this little bit of characterization or substantive stuff so I can run away with it. That type of down the branch spread is incredibly helpful. But from third to second, but it happens from the prep with your first to second speaker. And then mindset wise, make your other speakers look good. Second speakers are about making other speakers look good. That is life. It is an incredibly rewarding role when the judge is like, this case was fantastic. It really blossomed around the second, where all the stuff started making sense. That added the clarity. That's an incredibly wonderful feeling, and it'll have the nice benefit of not only boosting your speaks, but the speaks of your entire team. So if you are a second speaker, claim your team's success as your own. You are by far the most important speaker. Sorry, that was just my formal perspective. I'm speaking third at this Australs, which I think will be a unique experience. But most of the time in New Zealand, I would speak second. Okay, any last questions before we finish off and I go finish my 5,000 word family law assignment to next week? I have written 500 words. And I'm going to Whippersnapper this weekend. Who's coming to Whippersnapper? Give some Whippersnapper love in the comments. Oh, it's a beautiful evening. Don't know what I'm gonna have for dinner. Me and my partner made some ottolenghi dishes like 5 or 6 days ago that I've just been slowly eating my way through. And we made this dish which is like leeks, and you just like blanch the leeks and then you fry the leeks and you put it with balsamic vinegar and like onions. But it's really, really good if you let it sit and then you slice it up and then you like recook it and you put it on top of like a sandwich or something. Leeks are an excellent vegetable. Okay, give you 2 more minutes if you have any last thoughts. If not, we'll sign off, and I hope to see you at Club Night. Club Night is excellent. Neat. I think that may be the end of our session. Once again, hope you come to Club Night. Hope you're coming to Whippersnapper. If you want to judge at Whippersnapper, just flick through a message. Judges are excellent, and hopefully we can find a space for you. If not, I'm sure I'll see you at one of the many other events that Auckland Uni is soon to host.